Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third spacewalk. I just want to first of all thank all of you for all your efforts. I know lots of you have been chatting with colleagues, chatting with your co-pilots, chatting with your groups, and that's wonderful, and we're so pleased to see everybody trying to apply all their learning and understanding. I do just want to remind everybody that we have got a very structured program to make sure that we all meet the deadlines. So please don't rush ahead with your self-nomination form. We don't want anybody to trip up at the first hurdle. The self-nomination form will be gone through in next week's session, so somebody will be helping you with that. And it is also important to just remind everybody that this is a three-phase process. So the first phase is that you fill in the information on the self-nomination form that tells them a bit about you. The second part of that form is going into a bit more detail about the tools that you utilize, and that is going to be scored by a Microsoft algorithm to determine whether they're going to allow you to this third phase, which is where you submit your application. That is where you will be linking your OneNote that you're working on with all your responses to those questions, where you will have your hacks, you'll have your project, you will have looked at your 21 CLD project, and you would have reflected on them. If anybody is in any doubt, unsure, unclear, please can I ask you to check back either with your group mentor or otherwise to please go to one of the innovation mentors. So Tracy and Kevin are less encumbered by timetables than some of the rest of us. They are available for you and they will be able to help you. So please just don't rush ahead. And it's also quite important, we do realize that everybody is incredibly busy. There's a lot of teaching and marking and all sorts of other things happening. But what we do also need to be aware of is the fact that everybody needs to kind of take responsibility for their learning. So if you've missed something, please go and watch the videos. Please check in with somebody to help you. We don't want anyone to feel lost because circumstances have prevented them from joining in the group. So that's just my little teacher talk at the beginning. Moving swiftly along then. It just would help if I actually move to the next slide. As we said, today we're going to be covering the last three sections of the 21 CLD. So I'll be doing skilled communication, and then I'm handing over to a double serving of Kevin on self-regulation and ICT for learning before we move into our breakout rooms and have some team time with our co-pilots. So that's the plan. As you will remember, we've already spoken about collaboration, knowledge construction, and real-world problem solving. So this is really the other half of 21 CLD to get out the way. And I think they are not as difficult as you might think. So hopefully we sort of allay anybody's fears this afternoon. So when we're looking at skilled communication, there are four components that Microsoft are looking at, and they are here on this slide. So we're looking at extended communication, multimodal communication, supporting evidence, and focusing your communication on a particular audience. The last point is fairly self-evident. Perhaps the other three need a bit of explanation. So moving into that extended communication, really what we're looking for there is the fact that it's not just a single idea that the students have, but rather it is a set of connected ideas. In other words, it has a complexity to it. So for example, if you were looking at written work, it's not just one word or a sentence or a phrase. It would actually be a whole paragraph or a extended bit of work that they're doing. Obviously also age appropriate as well. If you were doing something in an electronic communication form, so a PowerPoint or a Sway, you would be looking for the students to connect their ideas and also have several ideas and several things that come into play on that particular mode of communication. So extended communication is not just about how long your students are talking to one another using electronic media or through their emails or their collaboration spaces. It is about the complexity and the connection of ideas and how these ideas come together in their project. Multimodal is when you're looking at more than one type of communication tool in order to connect things. And I have a, oh no, that's right. Sorry, I had a moment where I lost the plot. So don't feel alone if you're losing the plot. There's far too many things on my screen right now, but I'll cope. We all will cope. Anywho, so when we are looking at the multimodal communication, it needs to have more than one thing in it. So you having, for example, connection of ideas, you having the idea that you've got video and text, for example, all of that comes together in the particular production. When we're looking at supporting evidence, really what we're trying to see is that the students actually use the facts that they've been researching to be able to explain their ideas, their points of view, support the claims that they're making, or even the predictions that they are generating from what they have been researching or testing, and also to be able to support any theories or conclusions that they might have. That's a very important part of that as well. So the evidence must be something which explains their reasoning, it's something that has enough evidence to support the claim. So it shows a degree of robustness in terms of the actual academic rigor that the students are engaging with. Now, I appreciate that that's very much language that fits more with older students. Again, it needs to be age appropriate simply because the language that we're using seems to sit more comfortably in a secondary school phase. Does not mean that primary school students can't do that. All it is that the extent of their reasoning, the depth of their reasoning is obviously tailored to their age group. And lastly, it's very important that the audience is taken into consideration. So whatever communication tool your students choose should be appropriate to their readers, listeners, or viewers. So for example, if you look at sort of demographics, if you wanted your students to produce something that might be used in an area where Wi-Fi connectivity is a concern, then something like a podcast or a webcast or a webinar would not be ideal for that environment. It might be better to produce something that could be printed or something which is accessible without using a lot of data. And it's also about getting the students to select the tools or the content or the style. So we want to see that our students are actually engaged in the process, that they're not simply being told, you must produce a PowerPoint presentation that says. They need to think about that. And when they do, let them think about how can they best deliver their message using a combination of words, images, videos, audio clips, etc. When we look at the rubric in detail, you can see that they do have, they've basically taken the words that I've been using and they've put that into the four categories. And at this point, I just want to remind everybody, when you are writing your little blurb about your project, and you're commenting on the 6 different 21st century learning skills, it is also important that you level yourself. In other words, you say, this is a level 3. because it shows that you've understood those levels, and you do need to be demonstrating that understanding. You're not going to be in trouble if it's not all a level 4 or a level 5, but rather it's part of our ongoing reflection as educators that we think about where something's at and what we could do to improve it. You do this anyway. That worked this year, didn't work the year before, etc. You do it anyway. And then lastly, just the little rubric, not rubric, the flow diagram. Even I'm having problems with words today. Probably not a good idea to talk about communication on a day when you can't communicate. It simply lays it out nice and clearly for you to figure out what it is that you're doing. So if you notice, this is the one rubric where you can actually answer no and then have an opportunity to still score a level above. So it asks, is the communication extended or multimodal? Yes. Does it involve providing sufficient supporting evidence? If the answer to that is no, but it does have design that's appropriate to a specific audience, you can score it a 3. So there's a bit of wriggle room there. And hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory. And I think now that my words are running out, I'm actually going to hand over to Kevin, and hopefully he's got more words for you on such exciting things as self-regulation and using ICT in learning.
Yeah.
Okay, try now.
So I've just turned my mic on, Kevin, because I'm not sure if everybody can hear you.
Tell everybody that leaving the meeting, I'm coming right back.
Okay, so Kevin is leaving the meeting. He will be coming right back. This is really one of those moments where you, I'm sure, if there were a newsreader, would be terrified, because you now have to fill dead space while somebody comes on air. So, you know, it's great when you've got a class, you can say talk amongst yourselves. Unfortunately, you're all in different rooms and different places. I'm sure some of you are in your gym jams with your slippers, with a nice cup of something very hot, maybe a nice cup of coffee, hot chocolate, glühwein.
Hi everybody, am I being heard out there in the wide world? Okay, Teams keeps saying I'm being really quiet, so I'm trying.
Oh, Janine said we can hear you, so that's wonderful. Kevin, over to you.
Okay, so everybody.
It seems that Kevin is having technical problems. You might remember in 1970 something, when there were problems on TV, it was, please be patient, we have a technical problem.
So my next suggestion is just come sit.
So what we're going to do is we're going to, at this point, if Kevin can't get online, that I'm going to hand over my laptop to Kevin.
Okay.
So
Can everybody hear me now? Okay, so now you can hear me. Wendy, is your mic still on, or is everybody still out there? Okay, so everybody, I hate using these microphone headphone thingies, but that's exactly what I have to do today. So hopefully you can all hear me out in the big wide world today. Let me just go find my slide. So I want to start off by speaking about self-regulation. Hey, I got a clap, so things must be going better now. So if we looked at the old way of doing school, every child, every learner was a cog in the wheel. It was one size fits all. The whole learning process was about getting children into same space, learning the same skills, so that at the end of the process, we had the same child who can fill in whatever skill we needed and fill in the working world. And things have changed. Things have moved to more of an inquiry-based type learning. So learners actively involved in the learning process. Today, the requirements are on people in the world of work to manage themselves and to engage in multidisciplinary projects with colleagues. There's a need for majority of workers to be able to work within teams, to engage in complex problem solving, and to take up initiative and to be proactive. So if you go back to old way where everybody's just a cog in a wheel and you doing what you're told to do, that's not going to actually build you for the future world of work that the kids are going into. So we really need to look at how are we running our classrooms, how are we running our schools differently to meet the future needs. And this is a huge mindset change. For those of us who've been in education for years and years and years, it's going to be a huge thing to start looking at this differently. Now, what this means, it doesn't mean that every single lesson, every single time you meet with those learners, that it now suddenly has to be different. But we need to start thinking about how do we start changing the education process. If you think back of how we were so reliant on textbooks in the past, and by the time the textbook is printed and put on your desk, it's already outdated. Think of the vast amount of information that is out there and how different it is now. And just, I've been interrupted, my ADD kicked in, and Kathleen, yes, I do look like a bit of a DJ right now, so thank you for that comment. So we need to think as differently, where teachers used to be the sole provider of information in the classroom, to thinking of teachers being co-contributors in classrooms now, where kids are learning with the teacher, where we bring in new stuff. But part of the key of this is effective feedback. The teacher has to have a key role in providing effective feedback. So if you go look at some of the Microsoft terms, when they're looking at self-regulation, they're looking at three key areas. They're looking at long-term activity, they're looking at planning own work, and an opportunity to revise work based on feedback. So when Microsoft talks about a long-term activity, they're not talking about an activity that is completed in a particular lesson. It needs to be a work that goes over a couple of lessons, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, where they have the opportunity to set their own goals, set their own time frame, get back and relook at the work. So it becomes a whole process of looking at it. So it has to be longer than just a period for us to score it as a self-regulation task. The next thing is that they be part of planning their own work. So the first part is the learning goals. What is it that they need to learn? What is it that you're trying to achieve out of this process? And it has to, these learning goals need to fit with either prior or future learning, something that they've already learned that they're now going to apply, or something that they're going to learn. And then the success criteria is how well do they achieve those particular learning goals? So that forms part of the planning of their own work. So once you know what the goals you need to achieve, the learner then need to help with that situation and say, how am I actually going to get the place where I've learned these skills, where I've done this? Now, as Wendy's mentioned too, this sounds much easier to do in a secondary school than in a primary school, but it is possible within a primary school. So I know that at school, for example, we have the Duplo trains that have coding in it, and you can create a whole project around it and say to the kids, okay, here's the situation. I need you to build train tracks from here to there. We need to fill this story. How are we going to do it? And then you allow them to engage and to talk and to grapple with this topic at their particular level. So it's a whole time about thinking about where is your class at, where are your learners at, and how are we going to make this work for that group. To help learners plan their own work, they need to decide on the how. So think students break down a complex task into smaller subtasks. They decide when, what is the schedule? So very much like the MIE project that you need to do. you got to decide, when are you going to have this task by? This is the due date. When are you going to have this part of the task done by? And so you go through that process. Who's involved in the group? What's the responsibility of the group members? And where is this going to take place? Are we going to do just in class? Do we need to get some work from outside the school where we have to go buy some material? Do we have to go interview somebody? Whatever it is, they need to go through a bit of that process. Then one of the key elements here is the opportunity to revise work based on feedback. Now, that feedback can come back from teachers, it can come from peers, it can come from the learner's own self-reflection. But teachers, what they're saying here is when they're looking at for feedback, it's far more than just well done, good job. It's about saying, okay, you've done this section really well. Over here, here's room for improvement, and perhaps think about adding some of this on. So it's really about giving effective feedback that will help the learner grow. And once again, if you look at the rubric, these rubrics are very simple and they are here to help us as teachers evaluate what we are teaching. And they use the words that we've just been taught now. Is it long term? What are the learning goals? What are the associated success criteria? And you go through it and look at where do you score that particular lesson on this rubric. And not every lesson and not every bit of work that you do is going to score at a 4. Sometimes it'll be at a 2 and sometimes at a 3. And that's okay. It's about the reflection process. And I love the decision trees where it helps you to really just ask. So is it a long-term activity? Yes, they've had to do it over a week. Did the students plan their own work? No. So now it sits at a level 2. And that's how we use this decision tree. Then the last topic that you'll be covering for the 21 CLD is the use of ICT for learning. What technology, what IT stuff are we using in the classroom? And I love this. While digital technologies are becoming increasingly common in the classroom and learning environments, they are often used to present or consume information rather than to transform learning experiences. So when we're looking at the use of ICT, it's not just about the teacher standing in front of the class presenting on the smartboard and that. It's about engaging with the learners using the technology, the learners getting involved. And I want to share something with you today. Earlier on in the week, I listened to a podcast by Matt Warner and Rebecca. I can't think of her surname now. And it really was fantastic. And it's the guest speaker that they had in there was a teacher, a French teacher, modern foreign language French teacher, who came to school who was very much against IT in the class originally. So I will share the link of the whole podcast with you, but I'm going to share just a few minutes of what she had to say and her experience of the podcast. So let's see if I can get this work with everything that's been working so fantastically for me today. So let's see here quickly. I hope you can all see that.
I'm going to just I'm just going to sort of change things up a little bit here. I'm going to go to question 2 and we'll come back to 1. So Catherine, you've been at the school sort of 5 years or so. If you don't mind me saying, you started, I don't think you'd ever used an iPad before. You were using technology, but I suppose I think your eyes were probably opened in terms of what was going on at the school and how technology was being used. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk me through a little bit about that journey of sort of starting, you know, with current things in place in terms of your practice, and then having to maybe sort of reflect, refine, look at things. Because I know we had some really good chats, haven't we, over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely.
About why we're using technology.
Yes.
You don't see a purpose for certain things, or certain things really fit well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to be honest, and when I first started, I think if we frame it in a positive light, we can say that I had a healthy dose of skepticism about technology. And I remember on my PGCE year being taught by somebody who said, basically he was talking about smart boards, and he said smart boards are great because you can open a box on a smart board and a child thinks it's a real box in front of you. But he said that never really replaces actually giving the child a box to open. So for me, I was thinking, well, all these things are replacing things that you can actually be doing with your hands. And that's where I thought that technology ended. It was just an imitation of real life. And for me, modern foreign languages is about getting the pupils to be doing things in real life. So I didn't want to use technology to replace things that I can be doing with them, using their hands, kinesthetic learning. But that's because I had absolutely no idea what a DLP was. I didn't understand what it was. I thought it was just smart boards and a bit more gimmicky. Then when I realised what the iPad and the DLP could do for me, I started to soften up to it and realise how actually it could make my life so much easier, but also make the learning for the pupils 100 times more interesting. So that has been a journey, but one that I've absolutely loved. And I still say to my husband these days, I cannot believe how amazing this is, that I can have somebody send me a piece of work at any time of the day, and I can receive that piece of work, mark it, and give some feedback, written or oral feedback, in real time. I still can't believe that that's possible. So those kind of things, I think, have really improved my teaching and the pupils' experience of learning as well.
I think what I really like about you, Catherine, is the fact that you shared these concerns and you're vocal about these concerns, and I think that's good. I think it's good to voice any concerns that we do have.
I think I agree, because I think it gave people that were quite anxious a voice. They were listening to you vocally saying, oh, I'm not so sure about this. Whereas some people were a bit more reserved, but actually you raised some really valid points, and I think it made us think about the effectiveness of the tools we were using and not just doing it for the sake and not using tech.
I remember one lesson that we had, and I am, well, I've been told I am, again, in a positive spin, refreshingly honest, but that can also go really wrong as well. But I remember when we were talking once, and we were talking about Padlet, and I think you were saying, Matt, oh, it's great, the pupils, they can have a conversation on Padlet. And I was going, but Matt, they can just have a conversation in the classroom. What are you talking about? But then when I got to know Padlet, I was thinking, and I was realising that actually our pupils in year 6 can't just pick up the phone and talk to their pen pals necessarily. So Padlet, for me, I understood what you were meaning about. I could put work on Padlet for our pupils, and the pupils in France could put work on the Padlet at the same time, and in real time they were being able to communicate. So it's just, I think, me, you know, and also I am of an age now where I'm on the cusp of technology overwhelming me, as opposed to maybe you, Rebecca, who you just take it all on board. You know, when I went to university, I didn't even have an email address when I was at university. I didn't even have a computer, so I did all my essays. So I'm that generation that's just on the borderline of being overwhelmed by it.
Age.
But I can.
We're pretty close in age, Catherine.
So that was just a quick thing I wanted to share with you. I will give you the link to the whole podcast that you can go listen to it. It was very informative of how her mindset towards technology had changed in the classroom. And the fear that we often have with technology is shared throughout the world. So it's not just us who sometimes battle with technology in the classroom. This is a problem throughout the world that people are battling to. How do we do this? How do we change everything? So let me just go find my slide again. And I wait patiently for everything to open. So if we look at the use of ICT for learning, and I hope everybody can see the slide in front of them again. So the 4 key areas that Microsoft wants to focus on is the student use of ICT. So this is where students actually use the technology. It's not just about us sharing our PowerPoint or us presenting something on Teams like we're doing right now. So if I had to take this as my classroom right now, your use of ICT is very, very minimal. You've had to do nothing. You don't have to really interact. If I had put in a form here where I expected you to participate, or you had to give a form asking questions on something that I've taught on, then it becomes a bit different. But just because I've presented something and you are logged onto some platform doesn't mean that you've really used ICT. Then the next thing is, has it support knowledge construction? Do they actually need it to help them build their knowledge? And in other words, do they have to go out and research something? Do they have to go and test something using a whole lot of thermometers that have plugged in the computer that's now graphing all of this? They've actually used technology to help them build knowledge. And then that's when it's supported. So anytime you go and research on the internet, or you go and you build your presentation, that is supporting, knowledge construction. But moments where it's required for knowledge construction. So for example, like the history department is having their lessons with a whole lot of people sitting in other countries. It makes the use of technology vitally important for that lesson to happen. Without the technology, that lesson couldn't happen. For example, we could all actually be sitting in our hall and being together and inviting the few people that are from outside schools into one place. It's still possible. But now if we're crossing over the seas and it's far away, it doesn't become possible. So it's then required for knowledge construction. And that's what they were talking about in that one. And then are the learners designers of technology or ICT products? Do they make a podcast? Do they make a webinar? Have they had to present a PowerPoint? Whatever it is, have they been part of that design process? And that is where it becomes really, really important. And we go and we take it then back to our rubric. And once you've got all those levels covered, you're sitting at a level 5. But we might not always get to that level. So think carefully of where your students are and ask, do the students have the opportunity to use ICT? Yes. Does it support their knowledge construction? Yes. They've had to research a topic or research an idea. Is it required for constructing this knowledge? No, they could have actually used another method, or yes, it was vital to it. And then did they have to design some product using it? So that's how that goes through that process. And this is a learning curve for everybody. And one thing I loved about the speaker in the podcast was how she spoke about that when she was at university, she didn't even have an email address. And I remember sitting in that place too, where it was telling me, can we go to create an email address? I'm like, what are you talking about? And my wife thought that technology would never actually take off. So she never really bothered to learn the laptop, thinking this is a phase, it will pass. And look where we're sitting today. Look at our school, for example, just everything that we have here. So it's going to continue, it's going. But no matter where you're coming from, we all have to learn. And what we need to remember is that the young people we are teaching know this stuff inside and out. So the technology that they're using every day in their lives, we need to bring that into the classroom. And don't be afraid to say to them, I don't understand this. You're the expert here. Let's figure this out together. Let's learn together. And they love that opportunity to show the teacher how to do it. I remember at the beginning of the year, we were helping the grade 4s just get the laptops going, and they were getting onto OneNote, and I couldn't figure out how to do something. And I just said, Mike, I don't know how to do this. And all the hands went up. It was like, Mr. Smart, we know how. And they showed me how the product worked. And they loved that moment to show up the teacher and say, we know how to do this, we will teach you. So don't be afraid of those moments in class either. So thank you. That concludes what we're teaching on the 21 CLD. If you go back to the Microsoft Education Center, you'll be able to go and complete the 21 CLD learning path. We've covered all the work you need to answer those questions, to get all those badges. So please, when you have time to go and do that, we are going to go off into our breakout rooms now. Go grab a quick cup of coffee, come back, and while the breakout rooms go into the various rooms and presenters are set up. But thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the breakout rooms.